Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'll be showing you how I made this underbust corset. So if you're interested in this video, please make sure you keep on watching. For this tutorial, I'll be making use of the pattern that I drafted in my basic bodice video. I'll put the link to the video in the description box so you can check it out. To begin alteration on the front bodice, I would go ahead and add extra pattern paper along the side seam and also on the waistline area. I have done that right here, as you can see. So now I can go ahead to make alterations on the front. I'll put the back away and focus on the front. So from my bust point line, I would go ahead and mark 3 inches. This would be my underbust line because the distance from my bust point to my underbust is 3 inches. I will connect the lines together. Now I'm marking 3.5 inches below my waistline. I will go ahead and mark it across that area and I'll connect the lines together. While drafting the pattern, I added 1 inch of dart at the waistline area. So now I'll go ahead and increase the dart to 1.5 inches. So I'll be marking 0.75 inch on both sides of the dart line at my waistline. And I will do the same thing right here at my bust point line. 0.75 inch on both sides of the line. This line right here, I would measure what I have from the center of my paper to my first dart line. I have 3.5 inches. So I'll go back to that line and mark the same thing right there. And I'll connect the lines together. After that, I would also mark 0.75 inch on both sides of the line, making a total of 1.5, and I'll make a connection from my waistline to that point. After that, I will also make a connection from my underbust down to my waistline. At my bust point line, I would mark 1/2 inch inwards like this. And I will make a connection from that point to my underbust line. Right here, I am just marking 1/2 inch below my underbust line. So I'll extend the lines together. On my waistline, I would measure what I have from the center of my paper to my first dart line. Whatever I have, I'll place it on the second dart line and mark 1/4 of my waist circumference, which is 8 inches, and I'll go ahead and also add 1 inch side seam allowance right there. At that 3.5 inch mark, I will repeat exactly the same thing that I did on my waistline. Then I'll go ahead and connect the new side seam allowance line together. I would also make a connection from my chest line to my waistline. This becomes my new side seam allowance. At this point, I would place my ruler like this and make a new connection from my bust point line down to that point. After that, I will go ahead and close the dart line like this. I would place my ruler this way and make a connection from my side seam down to that 3.5 inch mark. Note that the connection is before my side seam allowance, okay? At this point below my underbust line, I will place my ruler like this and make a connection from my bust point line downwards. I'll go ahead and blend the lines and also extend the line in a curved manner from my bust point line down to that same point. After that, I'll go ahead and open up the dart again and I'll mark out my seam allowance of 1/2 inch below my waistline, and then I'll connect the line back into the curved line at that point. To close my bust dart, I will go ahead and cut open the dart line from this point all the way to 1 inch below my bust point line. After that is done, I'll go ahead to close the dart and I'll seal that area with my paper tape. So you can see that this line has moved. So I'll go ahead and reconnect the lines together like this. I'll mark out my side seam allowance like this, and then I'll go ahead to cut out the front pattern like this. Once I'm done cutting out the front patterns, I'll label them as F1 and F2. So I'll put the front patterns aside and focus on the back. So this is my back pattern. I'll go ahead and first mark my bust point line, which is 2 inches below my chest line. There is no bust at the back, but for the side seam of the back to match up with the side seam of the front, I have to mark out my bust point line. So I'll connect the lines together like this, and at this point I will be creating loops at the back. So I'll go ahead and mark 1 inch inwards at the bust point line and also 1 inch inwards from my waistline, and I'll connect the lines together in a straight line. I'll also make sure that I make the darts at the back bolder. Next, I will place the side seam of the front on the back side seam. If they are not aligned, I would make the correction right there, as you can see me doing. After that, I would make a connection or reblend the line into the dart line right there at the back. So this is how I'll be cutting out the back pattern. Now I'll just go ahead and label my back patterns as B1 and B2. And with an arrow sign, I'll be indicating the areas where I'll be adding half an inch seam allowance when I cut on my fabric. I'll also do the same thing right here on my front pattern. Note that the center front will not be cut on a fold, so I'll be adding half an inch seam allowance right there, and also I will indicate the areas where I'll be adding half an inch seam allowances. I'll be making use of this black mesh for this tutorial, and I'll also be making use of this black fabric right here. I'll be creating boning channels with this black bias, and the boning that I'll be working with is a plastic boning, and the one I have right here is a 1/4 inch. So I'll be cutting out 4 layers of my center front with a half inch seam allowance right there, and also for the F2 I'll be cutting out 4 layers of it too. Also I'll be cutting out 4 layers of my B2, and for the B1 I'll be cutting 4 layers of it from that black fabric right there. So I'll go ahead to cut out all my pieces. So here they are. I went ahead to secure them together with my pins. You can also go ahead to baste them if you want. So right here at the dart line of the back of my B1, I went ahead to iron half an inch seam allowance inside. You will understand as I proceed. I also went ahead to cut out long strips of my black fabric. So each of them is about 1.5 inch wide, as you can see, and the length is to your discretion. So before attaching the B1 to the B2 by the side, I would first need to create the loops right there at the back. So I'll go ahead and unpin them. Then from the top, I would mark 0.75 inch downwards. After that, I would also mark 0.75 inch upwards from the lower part of the fabric. And from this point, I would go ahead and mark 0.75 inch downwards. This is to create the point where I'll be attaching the loops. To create the loops for the back, I would go ahead and fold this my black strip of fabric into 2, and I'll go ahead and stitch close to the edge from this point right here all the way down to the other point. So I'll go ahead and do that right now. So I'm done, as you can see. So to create the loops now, I would measure 3 inches like this, and I'll cut that out. I would place the loop at this first point right here, and I would bend it over the other way to the second point like this. So I went ahead to cut out more of the 3-inch strip of fabric, and again I'll place it on the first point like this, secure it with my pin so it doesn't move, and I would bend it over to the second point like this, and I'll also secure it with my pin. I will do the same thing at the second point right there. And also at the third point. So here is what I have for now. So I'll go ahead and repeat the same step at the remaining points. Then I'll place the second part of the back like this. I'll do the same on the other side, and then I'll take this to my sewing machine and sew this area together by 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'll do that for the two of them. After sewing, I gave it a good press, and I also trimmed off the excess around this area so it lays nice and flat. To join the pieces together, I would be sewing them together on the outside. That is, the seam will be on the outside. So after sewing, this is what it looks like. I also went ahead to join the side seams together, and I trimmed off the excess seam allowance and gave it a good press. So to finish this part of the back, I would go ahead and bend this part with the seam ironed inside already. I will bend it over the other seam like this and secure with my pins. So I'll do the same thing on the other side of the back. So now you can understand why I ironed 1/2 inch seam allowance at the beginning. So once I'm done securing that area together, I would take this to my sewing machine and stitch very close to the edge. So I will do the same thing on this other side. But before then, to create my boning channels, I would place the bias like this on the seam lines. Remember that the seam lines are outside, so I will stitch close to the edge of the bias. So I'll repeat the same thing like this on the other seam lines. So I'll also create a boning channel right there after stitching the points together. I'll repeat the same thing on this side. So this is what they all look like after creating the channels. So now I'm going ahead to measure the amount of boning that I need, making sure that the boning doesn't get into the seam allowance at both the neckline and the hem. So I'll insert the boning, and I'll do the same for the rest of the channels. So here they are. This is how the inside looks like. You can see that the boning is transparent on the inside. So if you're using a bias to create your boning channel like me, make sure you also sew the bias on the inside too, so that your boning is not visible. Well, because I'm sewing it for me, I can get away with it. I'll be making use of this strip of black fabric to finish the neckline area and the hem area of the corset. So to finish the neckline area, first of all, this is the inside. I would place it like this at the back. I'll make sure there's an extension right there of about 1.5 inches. So I'll fold it this way and stitch with 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way to the other side, just the same as this side. So after sewing, I will trim off the excess seam allowance, and then I would fold the rest of the fabric this way, and then I will tuck in the extra fabric like this and stitch. Note that I'm finishing the neckline and hem on the outer part. So this is what it looks like. It looks really good. So this is the inside. Then for the back loops, I have gone ahead to create this strap right here with the rest of my fabric. So I'll be lacing up the back loops with the strap. So I'll go ahead and do that. So here's the finished look of the corset. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a giant thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Turn on post notification for more videos. This is the back view, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye.